but only after Goss threatened to cut the NSA budget. Still, Goss's committee concluded the NSA was observing the law and filtering out unauthorized intercepts that came in through the echelon spy system.
We do have methods for that, and I am relatively sure that those procedures are working very well.
After the investigation, the uproar over echelon in the U.S. died down. In Europe, however, the furor was just beginning. When word of the echelon system first came to light in the European press in the mid-90s, the European Parliament appointed a commission to study the issue. A subsequent report claimed the United States was using echelon for industrial espionage, gathering sensitive information on European corporations and turning it over to American competitors.
It's not the, if you want, the echelon system that's the problem, it's how it's being used. Now, you know, if we're catching the bad guys, we're completely in favor of that. Whether it's you catching the bad guys, us, or anybody else, we don't like the bad guys. What we're concerned about is that some of the good guys in my constituency don't have jobs because US corporations got an inside track on some global deal.
For example, the report alleged that the NSA lifted all the faxes and phone calls between the European aircraft manufacturer Airbus and Saudi Arabian Airlines, and that the information helped two American companies, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, win a $6 billion contract. The report also alleged that the French company Thomson CSF lost a $1.3 billion satellite deal to Raytheon the same way.
The point that the U.S. made was that this was not economic espionage. This was detecting bribery, and that was something that, particularly starting in the Clinton administration, was a valid U.S. policy to try to detect when bribery was being used to the detriment of U.S. companies.
In major contracts, this type of surveillance can be expected to take place. And what NSA will say is, look, under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, we may be tasked to find out if everyone's playing on the same level playing field.
The NSA's director admits that economic eavesdropping takes place.
We do conduct collection for economic intelligence purposes. Questions of economic policy of foreign powers, for example, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, arms sales, drug trafficking, money laundering, or sanctions bustings. But these are all contained within our charter to conduct foreign intelligence.
After a 2-year investigation into Echelon's role in economic espionage, the European Parliament dropped the matter. They did, however, recommend that European Union members consider using encryption, a system of scrambling phone, fax, or email transmissions so that Echelon couldn't read them.
The whole thing about the European Union claiming that NSA was engaged in widespread economic espionage, I believe, was kind of overplayed. It's not to say it doesn't happen, it does, but of course the Europeans also conduct this type of economic surveillance and espionage.
France, for example, has 5 listening posts of its own.
You would have to be incredibly naive not to know that every industrialized nation on the face of the earth, and even some of the less developed nations of the earth, are out there spying on one another for competitive advantage in the global economy.
One example of how the Echelon partners have used economic information occurred when they picked up a suspicious-looking fax in the late 90s.
What NSA did was they picked up a letter of credit that went from the Iranian military to a small company in southern France. And that made a lot of people at NSA very nervous because this was a letter of credit for $1 million. And the company in southern France made cruise missile engines. So NSA began eavesdropping on his telephone and eavesdropping on his faxes and so forth. And it went on for quite a long time.
The NSA suspected the possible export of cruise missile engines to Iran, which would have been a violation of an arms embargo. Just to make sure, the French inspected the shipments before they went to Iran.
It turns out, according to the French, that it was a authorized generator. It wasn't a cruise missile engine.
Iran was a frequent focus of the NSA and its echelon partners.
It eavesdropped on a lot of communications between China, between Beijing and Tehran. Tehran had an agreement with China where China was supplying missile parts, and the U.S. was trying to get China to stop shipping these missile parts.
In 2000, the Clinton administration struck a deal with the Chinese government to stop shipping these weapons. But they didn't know if the Chinese would keep their word until the NSA learned that the Iranians were angry because their missile parts hadn't arrived. They insisted the Chinese representative in Tehran call Beijing.
The representative got on a telephone and called the major government company in Beijing and said, I have this person here from the Iranian government, and they want to speak to the president of the company and find out why they haven't shipped these missile parts yet. And NSA eavesdropped on that conversation and heard the person in Beijing say, well, the president's actually here, but tell him he's not here so he'll go away. And so by listening to these conversations, they were able to determine that the Chinese were complying.
The NSA may be extremely efficient in eavesdropping, but could it be losing its technological edge? Gone are the days when all Echelon had to do was put up a satellite dish and pull in all the information it wanted from the sky. In fact, information technology has changed so quickly that the NSA and its partners can hardly keep up.
They have to reinvest in a new way of doing business. This happened after World War II. Enormous amounts of money, enormous amounts of efforts from both industry and throughout the government to build NSA into basically what it is today. And there probably has to be a similar effort if they want to succeed. They have to find ways to pick out these little needles in this enormous volume of this enormous haystack of communications. And the only way they can do that is by becoming far more sophisticated in the way that they intercept communications.
In fact, the amount of information pouring into the NSA may already be overloading the system, as General Mike Hayden found out soon after he was appointed director in 1999.
It was a Monday night. I got a phone call at home about 8 o'clock from our SOO, our security operations officer in our 24-hour operations center. And he told me that our computers were down.
The NSA has 9 acres of computers.
I went through a series of questions in kind of disbelief, saying, how many computers are down? And the answer was, all of them.
It was January 2000, and while most of the East Coast was digging out of a surprise snowstorm, Hayden told his staff on closed-circuit TV just what was at stake.
And then I said to them, look, this is secret. This cannot be the second half of the sentence that begins, honey, you won't believe what happened to me at work today. Because the knowledge that we were down would increase the risk significantly to Americans around the world.
The computers were down for 3.5 days.
NSA headquarters was brain dead. We had some residual ability at our locations around the world, but I don't want to trivialize this. This was really bad.
Yeah, the biggest problem that NSA faced, stems from the technological revolution of the 1990s, which was marked by the dramatic upswing in the use of cellular telephones and greater use of fiber optic cables to carry internet and other forms of communications. The volume of communications around the world jumped almost 800% between 1990 and the end of the decade.
And that means that NSA has a much larger set of communications to sort through, and it has to come up ways to either more discreetly target what it wants to know, or what communications links it really wants, or it has to come up with a much better way of processing the information it collects. And how well they're doing that is something that's very hard to say from the outside.